Viewers, ever since Israel invoked its right to respond to the terror attack it has endured on October 7th, the country is subject to a backlash. There has been a worrying spike in Israelophobia around the world. Many Jews around the world are being villainized, and so are Israelis around the world who have nothing to do really with the situation that is obviously, viewers, and unfortunately playing out in Israel. The latest chilling example of this Israelophobia or Judeophobia came from a neighborhood in southern Paris over the last 24 hours where the Star of David was stamped outside Jewish-owned homes to mark them out. The images brought back memories of the Holocaust of World War II. In Germany, if you all remember, viewers, Jews were forced to wear armbands sporting the Star of David as a symbol of their pariah status. Those pictures from the middle of your screens should worry us all. In Russia, a mob of Dagestanis descended upon an airport to lynch Jews when a flight from Tel Aviv landed at the airport. Several of them have been detained and arrested. Several of the people who were part of the lynch mob, and viewers, a number of those passengers are critically wounded. This is an inflection point. And to discuss this, we have with us a panel of very, very qualified experts. Dan Illouz, member of the Israeli Knesset, Charlotte Littlewood, head of the UK-India desk at the ICFS, and Muhammad Najib, a Palestinian journalist and defense analyst. I want to first begin with you, Mr. Illouz. Many people are saying that, look, at the end of the day, all of these are spontaneous marches, protests, etc., because there is palpable anger against Israel, the people there, because Israel has been complicit in undermining any effort at striving towards a long-term solution. It has ghettoized Gazans, and today is, well, in the name of retaliation, self-defense, is carrying out a pogrom of such. How do you respond to these charges?
First of all, I think that these charges is completely ridiculous, but we also have to remember how this all started. This started with one of the most violent massacres that humanity has known, that was done by Hamas, a terrorist group that comes out of Gaza and that rules on all of Gaza. And this massacre was horrible, not only because of the number of people that got killed in that massacre, 1,400 people, but also because of the horrors that were done on that day. I'm talking about burning babies alive. Babies. Who burns babies alive? Those are evil people. Raping women while their husbands are watching, and then killing the husband and flaunting the women around. Abducting elderly without their medication. Those are horrors that show how evil the Hamas regime is. And there are times in history where humanity needs to be very clear. We don't need some political correctness and try to find the middle ground between two sides. We need to be very clear. There's good and there's evil. What Hamas did showed that Hamas is evil, just like the Nazis were evil in Second World War, just like ISIS is evil. The Hamas regime is evil. And Israel, on the other side, is a liberal democracy. It's not perfect. You can criticize a lot of things that Israel does, and that's okay. But Israel is a liberal democracy that is right now defending itself. It's trying to do everything it can in order to minimize civilian casualties on both sides, including warning Gaza residents and telling them to go south when it wants to attack the north. And it does everything it can in order to minimize civilian casualties, including targeting only military targets that Hamas uses. And any attempt to find a middle ground is just trying to equalize between both sides, and that's basically taking Hamas's side, because if you would have tried to yes.
Okay, so you're saying a false equivalence is being drawn, and that means that you're taking Hamas's side. Okay, let me just bring in Charlotte Littlewood here. Charlotte Littlewood, what do you make of these attacks on the Jewish people, and of course on Israelis specifically, and the nation of Israel?
So we're seeing an unprecedented spike in anti-Semitism across the globe. Our Community Security Trust in the UK has measured the highest number of anti-Semitic instances on record for last month. And that includes 35 assaults, 44 cases of vandalism, and 75 direct threats. However, I do have to disagree with the previous speaker. To try and find a middle ground is absolutely not to support Hamas. You can be absolutely assured that Hamas's ideology is evil, it's genocidal, and it will never allow peace in the region. Yet you can still be pro-solution. And this is where the problem lies, in trying to push people into one tribe or another. And the very word pro is a problem too. So to say pro-Palestine makes the marches in themselves tribal. Where is a pro-solution space? Where is a pro-future in which both Israel and Palestine can exist side by side? That is what I hope for, and that's something that I am not seeing in a discussion that I fear is not being had. And one of the fears I have is that it's not being had because people are then being seen as anti-Israel for trying to talk about a future solution. We can absolutely hold that we have seen a Holocaust now in our age. It is one of the most tragic things I have seen in my lifetime. However, we can use that energy, that deep pain, sorrow, and anger to push forward and try and find a solution. That should not be besmirched. That would be a great undoing.
Okay, well, we need to draw a distinction, but certainly the protests, Mr. Najib, many people will see them as not an attempt to find actually a solution, but to channel hate against Israel, which will become actually part of the problem, the long-term problem, because then you reduce this to a cycle of continuous violence and invective. How do we break out of that?
Yes, first of all, I want to regret the attacking, the injuring, the murder of any Israeli civilians in Gaza, or by the rockets that fallen on Israel in Tel Aviv, or any Israeli or Jewish or civilians around the world who were attacked during the past few weeks. Actually, I have many Israeli friends in Israel who believe in the right of the Palestinians, believe in political solution, not violent solution. And I want to assure that Hamas doesn't represent the Palestinians. Hamas is a group that has its ideology. Israel knows Hamas much better than anybody else, and they have experience with that. So many Palestinians don't support what Hamas did and doing against the Israeli civilians, neither here nor abroad. And the conflict is political conflict. It's not religious conflict. And turning that into religious conflict is a problem. Actually, I'm sorry also that the Israelis around the world, or the Jews around the world, pays the price of the Israeli right-wing government policy that denies the right of the Palestinian political rights. But that's always and only could be solved on the table of negotiation, not through violence at all. So I don't think, but as the whole world through the media sees that Israel disconnect the internet and closing the borders of Gaza, and many casualties among civilians in Gaza. So Hamas is a non-state group. Israel is a state that applies with international laws, with humanitarian laws, with the war laws. So that's targeting the civilians, or have this high number of casualties among the civilians. For sure, it's because the blame for Israeli armed forces policy, because the Palestinians, the Arabs, the Muslims, the Americans, the Europeans, everyone see it's like a kind of revenge from the civilians, not Hamas. I didn't see anyone said Israel can go. There are 30,000 Hamas militants in Gaza Strip, but there are another 2,000,000.3 civilians. So to go after the 30,000 doesn't mean to kill or displace the 2 million. And that's the issue that anger the people. But I assure you, it's a political conflict, not a religious conflict. And I regret the attacking of any Israeli civilians in Israel or in Gaza, borders that envelop Gaza or around the world, because this is not their problem. And there are many Israelis who support the right of Palestinians and looking for a political solution. And we shouldn't allow that to
so let me very quickly bring this down. Is this actually a problem that can be resolved politically, or is it something deeper? Let me bring in Dan Iliuz on this. Is it something deeper, Dan Iliuz?
I want to make it clear, the war right now is not between the Palestinian people and Israel. It's between Hamas and Israel. And yes, there are a lot of civilians, Palestinian civilians, that are in the middle there. But we also have to be very clear that Israel cares more about those civilians than Hamas actually does. Israel tries to target its strikes only at Hamas infrastructure. We do everything in order to, again, to warn Palestinian civilians, in order to get out of areas where we're about to launch an attack, in order to try and save civilians. If you contrast this with what Hamas doesn't only target Israeli civilians, and it does. We have to know that every single rocket thrown at it as Israel targets civilians, and that the massacre was against civilians, but they also don't care about their own civilians. They use them as defensive shields. They use them as human shields. They try to put them in harm's way. They even throw rockets at Israel that end up not getting to Israel, and they fall on their own people, including a hospital. And instead of
well,
saying
we're talking
sorry
on
to
a
their
day
own
when there has
people,
been a horrible attack on a refugee camp in the middle of Gaza. So, unfortunately, we can't ignore that. We can't ignore that.
This attack, again, we have to be very clear about it. This attack was against a military target, and
Well,
under that military target,
no, that is-
there were terror tunnels
Fair enough. I understand
that are
all
being
of that.
used
Let me
to
bring in Charlotte Littlewood one final time. Charlotte Littlewood, the problem as I see it is that perhaps this is not entirely a political issue. I think we need to scratch a little deeper. Can we say that Hamas was really working in any way towards a political resolution of this?
I think the answer lies in, if the political solution was solved, there would still be Islamist fundamentalists who would want to remove all Jews from the world. There would still be far-right and extreme leftist anti-Semites who see Jews as the problem of the world. I think no matter what our political solution is, Hamas would still want to eradicate all Jews. And this is a very important part to understand of what we are seeing. So you cannot remove the religious fundamentalism from the discussion. Of course, there are both things going on, but if you solve one, the other won't naturally be solved. I think also to compare the actions of Hamas and Israel, to say one is doing better than the other, I'm not sure that's the argument I would go down. I think Hamas is awful and doesn't need to be compared to Israel. Israel is a democracy defending itself, and to say one is doing better than the other is almost to degrade Israel in this conversation. But I do think Israel needs to be critical about how it handles wartime situations. And I know I think it's unfair in the way the international community has handled wars against ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and has not been self-critical and has not seen as much criticism as Israel is facing now. However, I believe there should have been self-criticism, and there should have been criticism levied at other Western states at those times that Israel is now facing. You could make the argument that Israel is getting an unfair amount of negative attention. That in itself could be anti-Semitic. However, I think critical assessment of war is important.
I think that point is very well made. Yes, we can't in some ways justify all the means to arrive at an end. And I think we need to be a little more discerning on that account. I leave it to this, viewers. It's an unfortunate turn of events. Let's hope that sanity prevails sooner than later.